Okay, we're going live here. Let's see if this kicks in. Hey guys, give us a thumbs up if you can hear us okay in the chat. Awesome.
I'll give you a moment of echo.
Cool. Yeah, we'll hear once we hear Bear's echo, we know we're for sure inside the matrix. Okay, I'm gonna hit record and fire this bad boy up. We got Topher Gardner today. Super stoked on this one, guys. Yeah. Share with your friends and family. Get everyone in the chat here. And let me hit record. Give me 1 second. Go. And let me hit. Oh, there's the echo. I hear an echo. Okay, here we go. And boom, we're back for another episode of AlphaCast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here as always with the splendid Dr. Bear Paul Lando, coming to you live and direct from the great state of Jefferson, where freedom still reigns supreme. We are here in the Smith River, flowing over its banks with all the rain and actually snow we've gotten. Bear, I was coming over the pass yesterday, and it was beautiful white wonderland coming across the border back into Karma, well, bad Karma Forma, Cali Pharma. As I'm splitting
snow in here too.
Oh, is it? Cool. I'm splitting time now.
It's beautiful today.
Yes. I love this weather. Winters here are magical indeed. And just can't be happier with all the rain we've gotten. It's really filled up the mountains in a beautiful way, and the river is so healthy. I must say, there's nothing like an undammed river to lift your spirits, as you could just see the nature's flows with like the Smith River here going up and down with the rain. Where I'm driving, splitting time now between Southern Oregon and North, and here in Del Norte, and the Rogue River is beautiful, but it never goes up and down because it's dammed. I'm realizing, and those damn rivers just aren't natural. But
our river's so healthy now that it took out my water pump, and so I was out in the pouring rain the other day, rigging a makeshift catchment system and attaching it to our water storage tanks that usually get water from the river. Yes. So I'm hoping those work. After a podcast, I'm going to go up and see how much water I scored.
Nice.
Yeah, we used to have to deal with that a lot in Costa Rica because a lot of us had micro hydro units, and our water catchment was coming out of a quebrada, which is a little stream. And when the big rains come, which they always do down there, it's it's a free for all. Developing systems where you can catch water that can handle the really big pushes when they come in is a challenge.
Yeah,
indeed.
This is going to be a good talk today, because I want to talk to you a lot about just that subject. Also, a lot about water. I know you're into Viktor Schauberger.
Yes,
and I think off grid here, we're pretty seasoned pros at it, but I still think we're doing it very crudely because we rely on all this stuff, including solar panels and everything, and all of it's unnecessary, but we're doing the best we can with what's available.
Right.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get into all this. We got Chris Topher Gardner on with us today, guys. One last thing, 2:40 Central Standard Time, 12:40 Pacific Standard Time. Bear Lando is going live on the Greater Reset. He's got a wonderful half-hour presentation on the permaculture of the alchemist permaculture. I don't know what you want to even call it, but tying in alchemy, permaculture, bioterrain medicine as only he can. So please go join and sign up for free at the Greater Reset, which is going on right now. I'll be out there flying out to Austin on Friday to DJ the after party on Saturday. So if you guys are in the Austin area and want to meet up, please holler at me on Telegram at AV Warrior. I'd love to meet up, maybe catch a bite and hang out with some AV peeps this weekend in Texas. Today, Christopher Gardner, he's a Domesteader, builder, massage therapist, and podcaster, originally from South Florida, now in the great Ozarks area. After being immersed in the study of Vedanta Advaita, I always say that. Is that right? Advaita? Advaita. He found himself in the middle of the Costa Rican jungle studying Viktor Schauberger, John Worrell Kelly, and Nikola Tesla for energy and food sovereignty. The quest for self-sufficiency brought him to learn how to build domes with Super Adobe and ferrocement. Ferrocement. Just like a musical instrument, we need to be tuned.
I had to look that word up, by the way, Mike, so don't worry about it.
Just like a musical instrument, we need to be tuned when we pick up and hold a discordant pattern. Quote, our bodies are living tuning forks that constantly ring at the same frequency as our environment. Bodywork is a signaling system that reminds the body and bioelectric field of its healthy harmonic. I have been trained how to manipulate the nervous system to find its highest octave of expression. Having the ability to mold buildings and people with his hands has benefited his hybridizing tendencies. This year, Christopher is launching his Coral Domes company in the Ozarks of Missouri while streaming with legends from around the world on his Biocharisma podcast. The Biocharisma podcast is an exploration of resilience with entrepreneurs. Having the courage to step outside the box and forge a beneficial direction is the epicenter of these conversations. The banter is grounded in reality while having the levity of inspiration in very much the same way we do here on AlphaCast. Hey, Bear, this is a long time coming here with Topher. We share a lot in sensibility and in philosophy. I'm looking forward to this talk today.
Oh, I am immensely. And thank you so much, Topher, for being with us. Yeah, you're very accomplished. And, part of my talk today is going to be sort of within the context. It's time for more people to get out there, roll up their sleeves and go to work and, yes, get away from behind the mics and reading and intellectualizing and actually start doing stuff. And that's what we're about here at Alfa Vedic. We kind of hit the ground running a couple years ago when we started because, we already had a lot of experience and working farms, doing medicine, working in an alchemy lab. And those are real essential components. So I can't wait to hear how you approach all those things. And building, which is one of your specialties, I know, is so important. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that too. So we, there are a lot of topics we could go into. Maybe the most appropriate or logical one is just to, have you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into all this.
I got into everything that I'm into now by accident. I was a
That's the best way.
I was a pretty accomplished high school athlete. I got a full scholarship to Michigan State to kick for them for 4 years. And when I was in that mode of being an athlete at that level, my body got into disrepair. I was concussed a lot. I
Football does that to you.
Yeah, I got beaten up pretty good, and I was in a lot of pain by my senior year, and I was being told by all these convention allopathic doctors that I couldn't do what I was doing. And they were giving me tons of different anti-inflammatories. I was like on 5 milligrams of prednisone for like 3.5 years. I had all these leaky gut syndromes from the anti-inflammatory agents I was taking, and I was just in pain, so I had a very low energy. And I had a girlfriend at the time that said, "Hey, let's take yoga as an elective." And I took yoga as an elective my final semester, my senior year at Michigan State, and this was like 1998, so it was kind of ahead of the curve, at least in Michigan. And within 3 or 4 weeks, I had no more back pain, and I could bend in all these directions that really helped my kicking. And I watched the levity of my mood. I at the time, my consciousness didn't really connect how I felt physically with how my consciousness was perceiving the world. And so after starting to feel good, I became unrelative to football. I became like, it kind of cracked the callousness that I had over my consciousness. And I found myself not liking being yelled at, not liking how fans treated me only as like my last performance, like all these things that I was kind of oblivious, because I was being shaped really by my desire to succeed. It made me impervious to my surroundings. And then within a couple of weeks of doing yoga, I found myself being ultra sensitive and just being hyper aware. And then I went to an NFL football camp, and my roommate was into transcendental meditation, and he's like, "Hey, have you ever tried meditating before?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" And he took me through about 10 minutes of like a guided meditation. And then I think I had what people call a satori, like the top of my head blew open and I was just gone. I was traveling. And when I came back into my body, I was like, "Whoa, what is this world? What are we doing here? Like, what's the whole thing?" And I had been exposed to a lot of different, I guess you could say, supernatural experiences before that point without knowing what they were. Like, I didn't really have a context for what it was that I was experiencing. So once my college career ended, I ended up playing in the Arena Football League for a few years, and tried out for a few NFL teams, and it, like, my heart wasn't in it. And in that, at
So what
that
position
level,
did you play?
I was a field goal kicker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
boy, I'd hate to be that guy when the game's on the line.
Yeah, it is a shit test. You can definitely say that. So yeah, I just really started getting into meditation. That same girlfriend that said we should take yoga, she was a few years older than I was, and she was into kinesiology. She was actually a kinesiologist, and I was always massaging her, and she's like, "You're better than anyone we have in our office. You should go ahead and become a massage therapist." And I was like, "Great, that sounds good." I've always, massage was in my family, and I always watched how my mother was an RN, and so she would come home from a long shift, and my dad would massage her neck, and I always, like, within our family, it was always obvious, like, how loving touch went very, very far. And so, in very short order, in my early 20s, I was teaching about twelve yoga classes a week, and I was a massage therapist. And it was like the high life of, living in South Florida. I rode my bike to all my classes. I lived on the ocean, had no AC, just was breathing the fresh ionized air off from the trade winds of the Atlantic. And I just really dove into a spiritual practice that was pretty much the exact opposite of my exposure in pro athletics. Like, going from that, like, dog eat dog world, total externalization. I internalized everything from that point, and I started reading a bunch of the sages, Nisargadatta Maharaj, Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, like all these mystics and sages, and I just fell in love with the whole notion of Vedanta Advaita, which is the path of non-duality. And so within a few years, I found myself going to this one ashram a bunch, and I moved into it and devoted my life to that path. And before long, we figured out that we couldn't really have that center in South Florida. So we were going to move it to Costa Rica. And this was right around my Saturn return. I was about 29 years old when that happened. And as Saturn returns want to do, the ashram crashed, and I found myself in the middle of the jungle with, no real life skills. Like, I could, bend in any direction. I could kick a ball pretty straight, but, and I could massage people, but, trying to survive was not the best thing. And so I had the grace of being able to live on it was an organic farm where they were practicing a lot of biodynamic techniques. And before I moved on to the farm, the owner of the farm had gifted me a book from Callum Coates, the book Living Energies. And so I started reading about this Austrian naturalist, Viktor Schauberger, and it just blew my mind. Like, wherever I was carrying this book, like all the deep philosophical things I'd learned from the East. Now I was like, I was reading this naturalist from a very Western mindset, and it like all of those spiritual principles blended. It was all this like perfect coalescence of spirit and matter. And I felt at home. Like, even though I really loved all the Eastern thought, it wasn't all that practical. And when I lived in India, it wasn't a practical way of being. Like, I'm a very active man. Like, I'm always building, inventing, doing things. And my spiritual practice there was a lot of sitting. And my mind doesn't rest when I sit. My mind actually rests when I'm active, when I'm actually engaged, when my body is being used, when I have locomotion. So I got super stoked to find Schauberger and his contemporaries, John Worrell, Keeley. These two gentlemen, the way they saw the world just blew my mind, because they were dealing with harmonics and pneumatics. And then also, I was on a spiritual level, I was being introduced to a lot of Rudolf Steiner. And then Steiner's principles helped bridge the Western world and the Eastern world, which I really needed, because I had this very polaric way of experiencing the world. And Steiner was like that beautiful center point that helped me understand the non-dualistic way of the Vedanta Advaita, along with more of like the Christian mysticism of the Western mind. And so I just started, experimenting and being exposed to these great biodynamic folk. And I had very little money. I was land rich, cash poor. So I was looking into building styles that could actually suit what I could do. And I found Super Adobe. In my entire life, I'd been really jazzed about domes, because where I grew up in South Florida, we had lots of hurricanes, and my dad was a builder. So we would always talk about how resilient a dome structure was. And it was kind of cool. Within my second year of living in Costa Rica, we had a really bad earthquake season. We had a really bad, like, inundated rainy season. And then we had an earthquake season where we had like 7 earthquakes in a row and one really big one. So I watched all these really well-built homes kind of slide down the mountain. And and they were all post and beam structures. And so my partner and I at the time were like, we don't have that much money. We can't build something that if there's an earthquake, it's going to go bye-bye. Like, we can't do that. And down there was no such thing as homeowners insurance or anything like that. Like, if something goes wrong with your home, it's coming out of your pocket. So I researched Super Adobe, and I started drawing all these beautiful dome ideas. And then one of my massage clients saw one of my drawings, and he's like, "That's exactly what I want as a home." And I was like, "Great, send me to school to learn how to build it." I go, "If you do that, then I'll build it for you." And so he did. He sent me to Cal Earth Institute in Hesperia, California. And I went there and I took their extended course on Super Adobe. And I went ahead and built the building that I drew for him. And I could send you guys a picture of it at some point, but
Mike, could you sorry, Topher. Mike, could you maybe from Topher's website maybe put up a couple pictures sometime during this? Because they're beautiful structures.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Topher, if you want to throw me that in the chat, I'll find it.
Where's the chat? I don't know where the chat is.
I
hit chat? Okay.
Yeah, just hit in our chat. Yeah.
All right. Yeah,
and awesome. I don't want to interrupt your flow, but what you're talking about with your exposure to Steiner and Schauberger, and they're great minds, of course, from more of a Western mindset. And in the old Rosicrucian teachings, they taught long ago that this time would come where the East and West would meet. And of course, the Eastern mysticism, brings wonderful attributes, but it also brings a little bit of passivity. And then you have the West, which were over manifestors, and to a fault, but at the same time, have the ability to manifest. So those guys, which were some of my early mentors too, they really did a lot for me because I went right from standard medicine into alternative, and Steiner and those folks really helped me wrap my mind around concepts that I was still struggling with because I was trying to understand from the perspective of other cultures, which wasn't the way I grew up. So wonderful. In the a guy got a hold of me a few years back. He was a linebacker for the Chicago Bears, and he is now a yoga instructor. Looks totally different, like we all do after we quit football, right? There are most of us. And he got a hold of me because he heard of my background in sports, and then also with what I was doing, in present time. And he wanted to team up with me to start a yoga program for ex-NFL players that, a lot of them have a lot of bad habits, we'll say, when they quit, go through their money, really never take care of their bodies. And then also, as if you're a blue chipper out of high school and you get recruited and you play, and, you kind of get used to being the center of attention and getting special treatment on campus and everything. And, then especially when you go on to the next level, when you quit, you have no identity, no clue as far as who you are. And so the whole concept was trying to not only help these guys heal their bodies, which is what I did with, a lot of the same things that you explored, but you also help them just reintegrate into the world beyond football, because football is, you talk about early supernatural experiences. I always considered my football experience as supernatural. I mean, it is so bizarre when you think about, what we used to do. Anyway, go ahead.
Well,
we're talking about building structures.
Well, I will say this, Bear, it is interesting that your children, the way you raised them, they didn't really play team sports. They surfed and did martial arts. And
I made certain of that. Yeah.
And that's how my children are. I got them starting Taekwondo. I didn't even tell you, Bear. I found a great dojo where we're up at, and they're into surfing and snowboarding, and actually one son's into tennis, but not a lot of team sports played early. But yeah, it's and that's kind of what I'm into.
I didn't want a chance that my kids were going to be subjected to some Neanderthal coach calling them a pussy, play with pain, suck it up. Are you hurt or are you injured? And all the stuff that we used to hear 1,000 times. And I actually had some good coaches that weren't total knuckle draggers. So I have to say, in fact, I got into yoga first because my head football coach in college, he used to be the offensive coordinator for Hank Stram in the old NFL, Kansas City Chiefs, and then he moved on to college, and we played, a nationally ranked team. But anyway, he did some research and found that football players actually have less injuries when they're flexible. Yes. So he researched and got all these yoga kind of contacts. And that was part of our off-season conditioning, as we had to start performing, not just, be fast and strong, but also to be flexible. And that actually carried over for the rest of my life. So I'm thankful for that, for my football coach.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I was a kicker. So I was always an odd duck. Kickers are made fun of for good reason. So I knew I even got into kicking by accident. I was a really good soccer player, and I when I was coming of age, I was trying to figure out what was the best way I could be close to all the girls I thought were pretty. So I was like, oh, I'll become a cheerleader. So I went out for cheerleading because I was like, hey, I get to it's sanctioned touching of all the prettiest girls. So I was like, woohoo. And I remember my soccer coach was walking by, and he was flabbergasted the fact that I was, doing cheerleading. And he's like, Gardner, come over here. And I ran over there. I was like, what's going on, coach? And he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm going to be a cheerleader. I get to toss and throw and do all this stuff. And he's like, no, you're coming out and you're going to be the kicker on the football team. And I'm like, no, I want to be with the girls. I want to touch them. And he's like, no, 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 you're coming out to play football. He goes, trust me, you'll get more girls doing this on the long run. And that's all he had to say. It was like, oh, that's my incentive. All right. And so I remember
And that's how
after
it all
my
started.
yeah, I was like after my first really good game as a kicker in middle school, I remember after this high school girl came up and she started walking next to me after the game and she was gripping my bicep and she was like, she was just giving me the positive attention I wanted. And I was like, I was hooked. I was like, I'm gonna be a kicker. But I was a decently sized player in high school, so my coaches always wanted me to play other positions, but I was playing at such a high level in high school that the guys that we were playing, like I played with like 8 Division I football players on my high school team. So I was like, no, 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 no. These guys are men. I'm just a kicker. I don't like getting hit by these guys. And so when I actually went to college, the only reason why I was getting concussed was I was getting hit by guys that ended up being pros on like kickoff, or in
Right.
like just these wild things. And then I got some off-field injuries from car accidents. But it's odd when you're a kicker because you're part of the team and you're an integral part of the success or failure of the team. But then again, you're also not really part of the team. And that's
I was
sort of
just going to say
That
that
was
you're like, you're on a team sport, but it's almost like you're golfing or something because
precisely.
that strike of the ball, I was going to be a kicker for a little bit too, because I was a soccer guy, but that's like you go into the zone and it's just all about striking that ball. And it's like, it is that Eastern mystical experience, right? Of getting out of thought and being one with the ball and not, and you're not really, I guess, except for, like you said, blocking on kickoffs and stuff. You're kind of in your own thing. You're in your own element as a kicker.
It was
Kickers
wonderful.
used to actually
Like
piss me off a little bit because when I was doing nutcracker drills during 2-a-days, they'd be over there in their shorts down the other end of the quad, doing kicking drills and things. But when you need a kicker in the pinch, that's the most important guy on the team. And I wouldn't want that kind of stress.
Yeah, it is a little stressful. And I find myself, I still have PTSD. I have that athlete's PTSD. Like, I think a lot of athletes get depressed because they don't, after their athletic quote unquote career is done, they don't experience the zone. And the cool thing with kicking is like you go into a highly stressful situation and you're like an assassin. You want to, you don't want to be seen or heard. Like my favorite thing ever in my career was being in a different opponent's stadium and having them go silent when I would make the kick. Because you hear all the derision before the kick, and then boom, you make the kick and it's silent. That was my favorite thing. And so it taught me a lot. It allowed me to go deep in meditation because that one pointed focus, that capacity to hyper focus, which I think a lot of high performers have, is where you can drop into hyper focus and block the world out. I think that has been a wonderful benefit to my life overall.
The one thing, this is my last football comment because I want to get into building in Costa Rica. Mike will tell you, don't bring up football because then that'll dominate the conversation. I'm not a football fan, but you relive your glory days if you played. What impressed me is when you run out in the middle of the field and there's 100,000 or more people, like when we played University of Texas, there's 110,000 people there. I always thought, what if all these people were gathered for a peace event and everybody was meditatively focused on something like world peace or any other kind of worthwhile issue? Isn't it amazing that you can't get enough of humanity together for something like that, but you can get them together for a football game? But when I used to go through the tunnel and then run out in the field, in those big stadiums, it's just amazing the energy of that many people all focused at the same time. And it's just like, there's a lot of power there. That's the one thing I remember.
Yeah, there's a ton of power. We played at Penn State, we played at Ohio State, Michigan. I mean, our home stadium was 78,000. It was sold out all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was just like playing, and then especially you could even feel it like when it was a nationally televised game, there was a lot more juice. Like you could feel the electricity in the air. And then we played the Cornhuskers when they were national champions a few times, and that was even a higher octave of electricity in the air. It was a lot of fun. But I find like as the ability to focus in those situations, I found it easier to focus with the more energy that was in the air than like when it was sort of like a BS game, like a game where, it didn't really matter. So I don't know. That's a weird thing. I think that's just my own personality type. I can get kind of complacent in normal situations, but in the higher stress situations, I found that it was a little bit easier to focus.
In when I was in emergency medicine, it was a very similar thing. We'd have situations where you have a lot of people all hurt at the same time, and you'd have to do triage and decide which of these 4 people you're going to work on, and then the rest are. But anyway, you're in an intense situation, and that's when you just get really calm,
Right.
and because you've got a job to do, and you aren't seeing the blood, you aren't distracted by a family member that's freaking out. And yeah, so it's definitely that kind of situation can really bring out the best in people,
Definitely. Definitely.
or not.
It's fun. The zone is fun. It's become ever since then, I become fascinated with what the zone actually is. I have this theory that when we're quote unquote in the zone, that we're actually just this hyper conduit for God to act through us. Like we're not doing it. And the paradox of being in the zone is you have these perfect moments where your body performs the task that it's supposed to perform. And then in retrospect, your ego kicks in and wants to take credit for it. But it was just the body and the mind were acting in perfect harmony, and they were doing what they were supposed to do. And then that moment is gone. And then the recording device of the mind comes in and goes, it wants to like, either take credit or it wants to dissect the situation. But I've always been fascinated with those moments of being able to like perform at an extremely high level. And then almost inevitably, it was always when my ego wasn't there. So that's what made Vedanta Advaita so appealing to me right after my college career, was because it was like, how do you access this egoless state, the state of spontaneous genius without willpower? And so that's all, to this day, that's a question that I'm still diving into, like what actually engages that for me in regular life.
Well, you can't be in your head, and I think the intensity that you're speaking of really forces you to get out of your intellect and just do what you got to do. And I would make the same case for farming, for doing hands-on healing work.
Right.
When you really start seeing magic happen, it's because you're not thinking about a thing. And that's I kind of sit back and watch a lot of the debates going on these days that are preoccupying everybody. Do germs cause disease? Who's doing what? And all the things that people like to argue about. Well, when you're actually in the practice of doing these things, you don't care about academic debates. Again, you just default back to being able to read between the lines and putting it on automatic.
Yeah, the very last modality that I've learned is cranial. It's biodialectic cranial sacral work. And my teacher, the whole thing that she harped on for 3 years was the capacity to witness something without wanting to change it. So you know this as somebody that lays hands on another person, that chirality, the phenomenology of feeling density or feeling something that's out of place. Instantly, my ego in the past would want to modify it and change it and like make it my ideal. And the cool thing with the cranial sacral practice that I've learned is it's just bearing witness, like actually being able to witness a thing and stay neutral actually induces my client's body to fix itself. I can accelerate a joint, or I could, roll out a muscle grouping or the fascia of the muscle and do all this stuff on a very, very physical, gross level. But if I have the capacity to witness what I'm witnessing and just hold neutral, it's miraculous how the loop current between my hands and their body then induces that body to correct itself. And
Right.
that's something that I've had to cultivate for quite a long time, but I find that in
It
almost
takes a
everything.
while.
Yeah.
So can
And
you just explain a little bit what that form of cranial sacral is? I did a lot of certifying in osteopathy and visceral and cranial, and it's one of my major tools, and it's just because it was so important. So you threw in some other terminologies with that. So how does that technique differ?
so in this technique, you're really just holding the occiput, and you're watching the long wave and the short wave.
Uh-huh.
That's actually, I don't even know what the fluid actually is. My teacher, she said they don't really know what that is actually causing that wave of energy to come up and down the spine, but you can feel an expansion in the occiput, and then you can feel a contraction. And when somebody's injured or out of alignment, what you'll feel is you'll feel a discordant vibration in the occiput, and it's not smooth. It's not this like, it's not like the way a tide will work, where a tide comes in, where you have a nice tide in and then a slow tide out. So the way I was taught was actually to witness whatever the variation in the long tide and the slow tide is in that, and just watch it, instead of trying to, once I feel something irregular or something that feels synthetic, trying to change it, trying to manipulate the neck or the head. I would actually just hold those points. And it's very odd. The way I was taught and the way I processed it was like making my hands almost invisible energetically, like almost making it so that the touch, the application points of my digits was so subtle that it was almost not there at all, to be able to accurately feel what is happening in that body, because so much of what we feel in another body is our own body in relation to that body. And that was something that it's taken me a very long time to understand, is like when you're touching somebody else or touching something else, it's not just the fact that you're feeling the wood that you're touching or the human that you're touching. You're also feeling your body, your tension, your actual energetics relative to that which you're interacting with. So in the biodialectic craniosacral work, you're essentially disappearing your digits, that which is interfacing with the occiput, to a point where you're so subtle you can feel the more subtle aspect of what's moving through their body.
And isn't it remarkable that conventional doctors actually argue that that even exists? I remember I was at a seminar one time. Actually, it's a kinesiology seminar, but at that point, I was already doing very advanced osteopathic work, cranial work, visceral manipulation. And something came up with somebody on a table during a workshop, and I just went over there to feel what was really happening, rather than somebody with muscle testing saying you've got this cranial fault. I said, well, let me feel, because you can actually feel what's going on.
Mhm.
And this is a room of so-called some enlightened, non-conventional chiro types, another. And one guy started making a woo-woo noise, because I was actually feeling what was going on. But also in conventional medicine, they say, well, you can't feel anything in the cranium because it ossifies and it doesn't
Wrong.
move. And of
That's
course,
so wrong.
they base that belief system on the fact that, just like I did when I was in medical school, you start cutting up cadavers, and the cranium, the sutures, within the different joints of the skull are ossified because the person's dead. And usually
Right.
in later life, when people, are losing their vitality, that solidification, that crystallization starts happening in the first place. And then when some Italian anatomist got in the mix, and did different kinds of studies, they were the ones that verified first that no, these joints actually move. They're supposed to move. If you didn't move, you'd be dead, and be the beginning of the end. So so important, I think, that doctors start learning how to use the most sophisticated and advanced technology on the plant, medically speaking, which is your hands. Thank you.
Yes, being chiral, having the capacity to actually feel through your hands. I always talk like I got into orgone accumulators and all this stuff, and I was like, well, wait a minute, my hands are the best orgone accumulators in the world. The very first chiropractor that I worked with, he was a qigong master, and he would sit there and he would do this roll with his hands before the day started, and he would see 40 clients in a day. And this was in the beginning of my massage career, and I would see 3 clients a day and get sick. And I'm like, how can you see 40 clients a day and not get sick? And we used to laugh because he was my size, but when you looked at his hands looked huge, but they were the size of my hands. So there was obviously something energetic that was going on. And he's like, well, I put on my surrogate hands. And I'm like, what do you mean surrogate hands? And so he showed me this qigong technique of where you're just building the prana in your light body, and you're essentially you're concentrating the chi around your hands, so your hands are there, but it's a impermeable energetic barrier. And the way my body would transduce that energy, it looked like his hands were magnified. We used to call them penis fingers, but his hands weren't all that big. It was just the energy around his hands allowed that image to come through. So like, there is something really beautiful about becoming ultra subtle, because from my perspective, when you're ultra subtle, there's the absolute brilliant tapestry that our creator has created is so evident. When I fall into my mind and I get more gross and I get more identified with materialism, whenever I'm in that mode, life isn't as alive, and it's definitely not as magical. And also, I find that the creative aspect of the creator disappears the more material I get in my body. Even when I'm creating material structures or building something, or I'm working on somebody that's supposedly material, it's supposedly material. I'm a big fan of Kenneth Wheeler, and I love the fact that he says everything is just concentrated. Hydrogen is concentrated light, and everything is one derivation of hydrogen or another. And I really have come to live that. I really think that's a true way of describing this very visceral hologram that we live in.
Yeah, hydrogen's that first fire element that kicks off precipitation, through the 4 levels of ether, and then everything follows fire. So yeah, absolutely right.
Hey, I found the website here. Sorry, it's Topher HQ. And speaking of working with hands, you're definitely doing a lot of that with your structures. And if you guys like, we could dive a little bit into that, because I know a lot of folks in our community are really into getting off grid and working the land. and are really interested in this type of stuff. So if you guys want to transition to that a bit, that would be fantastic. I can share some screens here if you guys like.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah, you guys would love it because with all the Schauberger inspiration, Schauberger was really big into eggs. He loved talking about the dimensionality of the egg shape, how it encodes phi. And so I started to build domes because I really wanted to build these egg-shaped water tanks. He talked about how in an egg-shaped water tank, you could have a minimum input of water in the way the flow would work in the egg. You wouldn't need any type of chemical or anything like that to actually keep the water fresh and alive. So in looking at an egg shape, I was like, I need to build a hemispherical dome and I need to build a lancet arch dome. And if I connect a hemispherical dome on the bottom to a lancet arch dome on the top, that gives me a perfect egg shape. And so through the years of learning the Super Adobe, how to actually do a three-dimensional, because all a lancet arch is a lancet arch is if you were to have a vesica Pisces, you cut the vesica Pisces in half. In that arch form that's in that, if you're to spin it in 360 degrees, that gives you a beehive or a lancet arch. Well, that's the top of an egg, if you're to round off the top. And then the hemisphere on the bottom is just exactly that. It's a hemisphere. So you connect the two, that gives you your egg shape. So that was really other than having a structure to live in that could handle the torrential, where I lived in Costa Rica, the mud there was like a lahar. Like after, months and months of raining, the ground would get so saturated and so plasticky. If you had a very heavy structure that was on that type of medium, if it was post and beam, you'd have one side dip into the earth and the other side would lift. So you get these parallelograms. Well, with domes, they slide on top of the earth. So if you have an earthquake moving the media underneath you, it doesn't matter. It's monolithic. It just moves on top. And then, so doing that with both the lancet arch dome, the beehive dome, and a regular hemispherical dome, that was like the penultimate, because it was getting me to the resultant of me being able to build my beehive water tanks, which I'm going to do here in Costa Rica, or excuse me, here in the Ozarks. The farm I'm
I'd like
on
to
now.
know a lot more about that.
Yeah, we're in the medium. It took me to learn about ferrocement, because we brought up that term earlier, ferrocement. And the construction company I'm working with here, I was describing to them what ferrocement was, and it's how they build bridges. So the ferrocement is when you have the metal, that's the mechanical element within your concrete. The metal is equal in weight to your actual aggregate and binder. So in normal concrete, your metal is only about 1/20th the weight of your binder and your aggregate. And in ferrocement, it's 1-to-1. So you can have something that's very flexible and have a lot of compressive strength. And this was right up Viktor Schauberger's alley, because his whole thing was, what drove his contemporaries crazy was he would build these forms that were so much smaller than what his contemporaries were building. And he said, well, one, the form itself is the strength, because whenever if you have a flat surface, the second you put a curve on it, it's 6 times stronger than when it was flat. That's why nature always uses curves. And if you put a double curve on it, it's 13 times stronger, given the same surface area. So when you look at an egg shape, he was able to move tremendous amounts of water, volume of water, in these really thin wooden eggs. And his contemporaries kept saying, oh, that won't work. That won't hold water. That won't be able to do whatever. And he's like, no, one, the shape is so much stronger than these boxes you're putting things in. And two, the way the water is moving inside, the flow of the water induces it increases the carrying capacity of the vessel. And this is this whole dynamic way of looking at life. Like you were talking about, looking at a dead cadaver and all the sutures are, they're rigidified. Well, you have to look at a living person to feel how everything is moving. And that was the beautiful thing of Schauberger, is he's like, no, you don't look at this as it's a dead system because water is alive. You have to look at this as an alive system, and you have to move the water in a way that it wants to move and play, and then you won't have to use an excess of material. And so that's kind of also what got me into ferrocement. You'll see in some of my structures, for some reason, I can't drag any of my photos into the chat. It's not letting me. I don't know if there has to be like if it has to be a certain file size, but I've been trying to add photos. Do you have any? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so this is like a third. Oh, if you go up a little bit, yeah, if you see, or down, I don't know how to say it. Yeah, right there where it says Biocharisma Podcast, you see that spiral roof? That spiral is known as a reciprocal roof. That's sort of what gave my company its claim to fame. I took a very old Native American idea with the teepee. They had flattened out the teepees in the southwest of the United States. And when they flattened out the teepee, they could do a roof that had like a 5-degree pitch on it, but it had this beautiful spiral design. And I got really tired of putting square roofs over round structures. So I was like, as soon as I saw the reciprocal roof, I was like, oh my God, that's the answer to my questions, but how am I going to sheathe that? All the material that you see, the ceiling and the roof above that, that's all ferrocement. So we free cast ferrocement on top of the spiral structures that we build.
That's amazing. And it looks like mostly done in terms of support through bamboo. Is that correct? Which has a certain resonance that is much more attuned to natural frequencies and harmonics versus using metal. Right.
Yeah,
So
you'll appreciate this. So with bamboo, and these are whole trees of teak. In Costa Rica, teak is an anathema to the environment because teak isn't an indigenous tree there. And in all the teak forest, all the other vegetation and animals go away because the leaves are so acidic. So, and the bauxite clay is so acidic to begin with. So what I was doing was I was going to where they were clearing teak plantations, and I was buying all of their long, thin rounds, all their whole trees that couldn't be used for furniture making. And then I would use those for my rafters, because whenever you have a round piece of lumber, it's so much stronger than if you were to actually use straight stock, because all the curves keep everything. It just adds to a tremendous how should I say it, surface area in this regard. A circle of surface area rules the day when it comes to downward force. So if you have a round rafter, like in log homes or in the homes that I create, that given the same volume of wood in square stock is half the strength. And this is back to a Schauberger principle, or just a principle in nature. Nature does everything with curves because curves are always reinforcing the other aspect of the structure, just like an egg. The curves on the top of the egg are reinforcing the curves on the bottom of the egg. When you have a tree and you look at a tree, the reason why it's this long cylinder, or you have a bamboo stalk that's hollow like a straw, or you have a palm tree that's hollow like a straw, all these structures that are these really long cylinders, that the curve of the cylinder is giving reciprocal integrity to the other side of the structure. So you can do so much more with it than if it's just square. I mean, the second I started, doing all these roofs with all this round stock, one, it really reduced the price, because if you try and get a 25-foot long straight rafter, good luck. What that will cost you is just an absurd amount of money. But I could go pick up somebody's dregs. I could go to a tree farm where they're like, selling these rafters at like, bottom barrel prices, and make it beautiful and use it. And so a lot of my construction career has just been taking one man's trash and making it my treasure, but knowing in the background all these natural principles of curvature. Like, it's just so easy when you look at it. Like, curvature is aesthetically pleasing. Like, we all like the curves in our women. Like, why wouldn't we like the curves in our structures? It's our body knows. And then when you start to get into the deeper mathematics of it and you see, oh my goodness, this is a fractal of phi, then it all really starts to make sense to you.
Same thing with farming. You look at factory farming and you have acres of just straight rows, whereas you go into more of a permaculture design and, you've got nice geometric shapes and circles, and, you never follow straight lines. So I'm a little unclear about the ferrocement. What's the actual materials? That's Adobe?
No, the ferrocement, what we're using is we use all different layers of hardware cloth. So that's like a metal mesh blanket, and we overlay them and tie them together. And then on the top layer, we'll use a nylon, like it's a nylon hardware cloth. And then what we do is we impregnate all of that in cement. So concrete
it's actual cement. Okay.
Yeah. So cement is a binder. And so when I first started building, I was building earthen round domes. I was building with Super Adobe. And what was very evident, and with how wet Costa Rica was that I needed to start learning how to build with a lighter medium, because at the end of the day, mass rules the day. So you could build something incredibly brilliant structure. If it's too heavy on the ground that's trying to support it, when you get a little bit of an earthquake or a little bit of a shake, or you get like a really crazy rainy season, that building will either sink or slide if it's on any type of pitch. And so as I evolved through my experience, I was like, if I'm going to live up on the mountain, I need to be able to build with a medium that is slightly lighter than the Super Adobe, and something that is more water resilient. And so that's what brought me to ferrocement.
Have you worked with Aircrete?
Yes, that's my Coral Domes company. So going on top, I wrote this whole thing about coral domes on the website, and I've done a bunch of articles for people about coral domes. But I look at Aircrete as man-made coral, because when you see what coral is a calcification. It's some sort of cementitious material that then is impregnated with bubbles. And I know you guys are into water structuring, and you understand the whole joy of microbubbles, microcavules, and how you can structure water with microcavules. Well, you can structure a structure with microcavules. So that's where I'm getting into now. The last 10 years, I've been working with Aircrete in building rocket stoves, rocket mass heaters, thermal mass heaters, and just using them for their insulative, the Aircrete for its insulative capacity. And now we're getting to a point where we've developed a system where we can use Aircrete like you would with shotcrete, with the way they make pools, but we can actually shoot the Aircrete onto a surface. And so, like in the pictures that you're showing, you can see the star dome there. All those colored ribs, that's metal. That would be 3-inch wide metal by a 1/4 inch thick, and we bend that under tension. and then we come over that with a layer of ferrocement, then a layer of Aircrete. And then that gives us an insulative medium, because now I live in a cold area. I never needed that in the tropics because insulation really isn't necessary there. But now that I live in an area that's much, much colder, I have to have the capacity to keep my heat or keep my cool inside.
Very
You ever
cool.
journey out to, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, so this was, I know of a couple other companies that I've met in my travels that are doing this, that are spraying concrete onto frames. Is that what you're saying? You can literally put this up in a day once you have the frame up? Is it a pretty quick turnaround?
Yes, I chose to go with the Japanese Star Dome because it's the problem with geodesic dome is all the joints that you have. And geodesic domes, they're brilliant structures, and I love Bucky. But the problem that you have is that you end up having all these pointy joints. And so the reason why I went with the Japanese Star Dome was, one, I love the story behind it. There was a Japanese mathematician that was looking at the mathematics of mandalas, and he had that like Jodie Foster moment in Contact. He's like, what would happen if you threw this into 3 dimensions? And so he did that with, I forget which mandala it was, but he ended up with a perfect dome. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, because I'm dealing with a lot of bamboo and I can bend bamboo. So I ended up building for a music festival a massive, massive dome out of a split bamboo and PVC pipe because they had no budget. But we had a dome structure that could field, it was over 1,100 square feet inside.
Was that for Envision Fest?
Yes.
Oh yeah. I know those guys. That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know you did PVC in that too. Oh wow. Okay. I remember that dome. Yeah.
Yeah, PVC is the only thing that made it possible. Yeah, that was because it was a temporary structure. Since then, we did a bunch of permanent structures for Envision. I guess the last time I built for Envision was in 2019, before the whole, shenanigans came about. But the cool thing is, with the permanent structures, we use, good stock metal, and we're essentially making these big ribs, these bows, and you take 15 of them of equal length, you lay them in a very specific mathematical configuration, geometrical configuration on the ground, and then we just pop it up. We literally, like a tent, we have people on every point, on 10 points, you push it up, and now it's frozen, but it's under tension. And just like in bridges, whenever you freeze the tension of your mechanical member in something that's solid, like cement, like concrete, it actually, the rigidification of the whole structure makes it that much stronger. And so, like, when people are doing, when you lay like on a normal floor, they'll have this type of rebar that looks like a grid of 4x4, and they'll lay that out, but it's flat. If you were just to put a little bend in that where there was tension in the metal, the floor would be substantially stronger. And this is how bridges are built. They'll run lengths of depending on the bridge, they'll run lengths of these really, really strong tension cables through the concrete. They'll crank those under tension, and then they'll pour the concrete.
So I'm sure you're aware of the company, the Aircrete company. They do workshops. In fact, I was going to try to get them out on the farm and have a workshop here, because I need to build a sound studio and I need the acoustics. I also want a dome, but they go about it with the inflatable form for the Aircrete. Do they reinforce that with rebarb or something, or is there just that form and the Aircrete stays in that particular
I don't know.
formation?
I've seen a bunch of companies. The company that initially turned me on to Aircrete was Dome Gaia, and they build blocks.
Oh yeah.
They'll do precast blocks, and then they build it like an igloo. And then I've seen Aircrete Harry. I've seen the company Aircrete with a K, and they give all the they have all the blowers for the Aircrete and the mix and the magnesium cement and all that. We're just doing our own hybrid style. I like to frame everything in this steel because I'm also into EMF mitigation. So it's like one of the things I'm always thinking about. And when I have this beautiful steel structure from the inside, one, it looks stunning to actually see the skeleton of the steel, but then it also gives me an asymmetric Faraday cage. And so I've been mixing in biochar into my concrete mixes for about 10 years now, and studying the effect of whether or not what type of EMF frequencies can get through a biochar impregnated aircrete. And so the experiments we've done up to this point is, depending on the ratio of biochar that we actually use in our wall mix, we can completely stop a cellular signal, any type of EMF that's projected at the house. We can completely stop it. So
wow, phenomenal. Can you explain for our audience what biochar is?
Biochar is pyrolyzed carbon. So when you have any biomass, anything that's been living, anything that's organic, that's been living, that's had a life cycle, it's primarily comprised of carbon. And so when you pyrolyze anything that's carbon, and I primarily pyrolyze old leaves, and we call it barucha, which is like whenever you're cutting wood, you end up with all these wood chips. So when you get that biomass dry, you can cook it in a vessel where the vessel doesn't allow any oxygen into it. And above about 850 degrees Fahrenheit, when you're cooking in the biomass in that vessel, all the volatiles that are in the biomass, they start to exit, and they'll positively pressurize that vessel, meaning nothing can enter that vessel. You just have gases escaping. And you have this sweet spot with biochar is when you're actually positively pressurizing that vessel with heat, and you get above 850 degrees, as the volatiles are leaving, the carbon itself crystallizes. And when it crystallizes, it's called carbon fixing. It, after that cycle, after that chemical process, it will not deteriorate. So the reason that's different than like normal charcoal, or like the carbon that you'll see in your wood-fired stove or anything like that, is that the entire time that's burning, that oxygen is coming in and adding oxidative stress, and it's actually changing the polarity of the carbon. The cool thing about biochar is I always get it mixed up. It's either which one is it? Because it invites the negatively charged. It positively ionizes the carbon. And so there's this really interesting relationship when you add that as a binder in concrete. Well, it's not a binder. It actually helps bind, but it's not technically a binder. When you add these little shards of carbon, they're like these, we were talking about the buckyball earlier. You have these like C60, graphene looking things on a microscopic level, where when you have anything that's trying to transverse or go past it, it reflects it. And it has the highest diamagnetic charge in nature. There is nothing of a higher diamagnetic charge than pyrolyzed carbon. So I'm studying diamagnetism and paramagnetism. I'm still trying to get my head around the whole alchemical way of looking at diamagnetic materials and paramagnetic materials. But the way I feel it in my body when I massage in areas that are highly paramagnetic or highly diamagnetic is, in a diamagnetic thing actually has a vertical polarity. meaning the energy will go up and down. Where something that's paramagnetic, technically it's going in every direction, but I actually feel it as a more horizontal shift. So I think what happens with biochar, and there's tons of studies out there with it, when you add it to concrete, it allows the calcification process to really it amplifies the calcification process, the hardening process in concrete. But the reason why it acts as such a wonderful EMF protector is, imagine you have a square wave trying to traverse something that is immediately polarizing it up and down. Like it can't get past that. It reflects it straight up or straight down. And so they have biochar paints that are, just like millimeters thick that will completely block an EMF frequency from getting through it. You don't need much. And whenever we're doing a medium of ferrocement or Aircrete with it, we're not any thicker than 2.5 inches. We never go thicker than that, and nothing can get through it.
That's I'm a huge fan of biochar for farming as well, and with the idea of inducing or introducing that into the soil to help protect it against all the EMF and dirty electricity and spraying and all that too. Is there some sense to that? The idea is protecting the micronutrients and the little critters in the soil.
I'm a huge fan of electroculture. I didn't even know that's what it was called.
Yeah.
An alchemist friend of mine about 1.5 years ago introduced me to that term, electroculture. I was reading a bunch of books back in the day when I was on these organic farms about paramagnetism and diamagnetism. And I really just got into biochar because I was so unhappy with flipping compost, especially in the tropics. Like, flipping compost was such a lost leader from a time perspective. It took so long for things to break down and for the thermophilic decomposition to fully happen. And then you end up with so little material to actually use in your garden that the top biodynamic guy in my area, he turned me on to biochar, and he turned me on to terra preta. And so I was like, the second I read about the terra preta in the Amazon rainforest, I was hooked. Because in the tropics in Costa Rica, the earth is all bauxite. It really carries next to no nutrients in the ground. All the nutrients, that area is meant to be a canopy rainforest. And in a canopy rainforest, the trees absorb their nutrition through the air. It's not carbon in the ground. So us dumb gringos that would go down there and try and create these Northern European farms is just stupid. But actually using biochar helped us game the system. And where the rubber really met the road for me in that regard was, I noticed all my beds where I had my plants with lots of biochar, they produced more food, but two, the leafcutter ants never came to them. And the leafcutter ants are a real problem there, because you could be growing everything organically, but because that plant's not supposed to be there, the leafcutters come and take it. They're like instant karma. So if you're doing anything wrong, the leafcutters come in and they'll just butcher your trees or butcher whatever you have planted. And I just noticed, I was like, because I lost an entire cacao plantation. Like, I had planted I'd gone to the I'd spent a lot of money trying to find very resilient cacao trees, chocolate trees in that area of the world, because they're not necessarily endemic to Costa Rica. They're from Brazil. And I spent a lot of money. I did all this time to cultivate the south face sloping land of my property. And I was all proud of it. I left for 2 weeks to go back to the States. When I came back, all my trees were totally eaten to the nub by leafcutter ants.
That's
And so
heartbreaking.
I was heartbroken. I was just like, oh, I have to find a better way. And the biochar just showed me like there's something about how mycelium reacts with a positively ionized carbon. It's different. It just does something different. I think there's a better communication. And then one of my shamanic friends had told me he was shown like one of the ways that you actually ground the etheric energy that from above is through pyrolyzed carbon. He was given this whole system where you like essentially make your property like the 4 pillars. You go to the corners and you create these, you put these biochar cylinders in the ground, and then you put one dead center of your property, and it's like doing a biodynamic prep. You take crushed quartz, crushed crystal, whatever holds your intention, you crush it and you put it within that carbon, and then you cap it like a sandwich with even more of the pyrolyzed carbon. And this creates a bubble around your property. And we started to do that, and with magnificent results. Like the farm that was right next to me was 180 acres, and mine was 3 acres. His farm had the leafcutter ants everywhere, and they were like right on the ridge of my property. It makes no sense. It's like the whole biodynamic thing. But because I had that little preparation on my farm, the leafcutter ants didn't come onto my property anymore. So there's some magic in there that I don't fully understand about the diamagnetic aspect of it, but it's a magical material to work with, and there has to be something with it with blocking the EMF that the plants really like. Because another thing I found out was in Costa Rica, the way the electrical grid system works there, I don't know the terminology when it comes to big electrical wires, but the way they send their ground back to base, they send it through the ground. Well, think about all those frequencies now that are touching our plants' roots. And there's something about having this diamagnetic bubble around the root ball that the plants just love.
That would make sense. And yeah, grounding away the carbon density from the vertical waveforms and the high hertz range, right? That's heating up the soil there. There's so much damage being done with that concept of grounding that dirty electricity through the soil. And especially that's a clay soil. That's really interesting. Wow, that's really cool what you're doing with biochar. I'd love to create a biochar. I'd like to have a biochar furnace on my property. I assume you've built one yourself, or multiple different versions.
I have a design that everybody wants me to sell. I call it my rocket retort. On Instagram, I have tons and tons of videos of my rocket retort. Super simple device, how to make it. I'm a huge fan of rocket stoves because once again, they're super efficient. And they're
super simple too.
Yeah. So the vertical part, the part that they call the thermal riser, instead of filling it with some sort of insulative medium, I fill it with biomass. And then I port the inner area so that when that positively pressurizes, it dumps all the gases inside to the thermal battery. That ignites, that doubles my heat. And then I pyrolyze all my carbon that much quicker.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool invention. A lot of people are pretty stoked about it, but to me, I just made it because everything was so wet there, and I needed carbon like immediately. Trying to do it with the different methods that you have, like there's ancient methods where you dig these huge long trenches, you throw all your biomass in those trenches, and then you cover them up with dirt. I just don't have the time to do all that. And I found that those are very inefficient, very smoky. I can convert 30 gallons by volume of biomass into biochar in less than 20 minutes.
Wow.
Is there any commercial source for biochar for people that don't have the ability to make their own? And the other comment I want to make is carbon will also fix moisture into the soil. So it's another good benefit. Like here, we have a monsoon season, which we're in the middle of right now. And then it gets just hot and dry in the summer. And, by the end of the summer, your soil is pretty hard.
Mhm.
And, so we use, that's a carbon-based amendment is what we use to just make sure that things don't dry out like that. So is there a commercial available source of biochar?
There are. I'm advertised all the time on Instagram with different people selling
Uh-huh.
biochar.
Great.
Yeah, in fact, I really thought people would want my retort, but in Costa Rica, before I left, the majority of people just wanted me to make biochar for them. I had one client, he's started the world's largest durian farm, and he wanted 30, how many tons did he want? He wanted 30 tons of biochar a month. He wanted over 400 tons of biochar a year. And I'm like, my little rocket retort can't do that. You got to find a different source. But he's like, I thought I was head over heels with biochar. This guy is like, he has the money and the time. He's like really doing biochar like you wouldn't believe, and he's having wonderful results. Like his farm in very short order, he's gonna shock the world with the different fruits and the different hybrids he's making.
With making biochar, you get a heavy energy output too, as it's gasifying. You could convert that to electricity, I assume.
So that's the fun of it. So at one point in my old house in Costa Rica, I had my rocket retort gasifier that I would have the heat that would come up. That was actually my stove in my kitchen. And then I made it a thermal mass heater where the exhaust would go under an old clawfoot tub and keep my clawfoot tub. But then I also had a copper coil within I call it my heat guide, and that heated the water that would dump into my bathtub.
That's beautiful.
I have videos of that on Instagram too. That was like I wanted to be like, the whole thing that they say stack functions, like
Yep.
stacking functions. That was like my ideal, was like one of the best movies of my childhood was Swiss Family Robinson.
Love that
And
movie.
like, where they could live off grid and they were up in the tree houses and stuff like that. And like, I always loved that idea. And I'm always trying to find a way to hold heat, like in the thermal mass heaters and stuff like that. Because heat, it's like the principle of when you have water on your property, you want it to do as much work as possible. You want to keep it on your property as long as you can, and you want it to do as much work as possible. The same thing with heat. And when you look at it, heat and water, it's all fluid dynamics. It's all how you route it, how it moves and plays and everything like that. And everything it touches, it can give to it. So that's a lot of the way I look at heat. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, that's like the Earthship concept, using thermal mass and passive systems, right? By stacking to get that sort of medium comfort level at all times by using the thermal mass of the soil and all that. That's interesting, Bear. That's an idea for the outdoor bath and shower system Mark Guyver's creating on the property right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, he will be building us a treehouse on the gazebo platform on the way down off the cliff on one of our river paths. We have a neighbor that's right across the river from our beach, Mike. And he has a lot of acres over on the other side there on the mountain. And he's a big biochar guy. In fact, he makes a lot of money doing it. And he's subsidized by the government to do this whole biochar thing. And then he turns around on the back and makes, bank on that end too.
Well,
But I need to go ahead.
I'm when you're making biochar, you're also making biogas. And so for off gridders, like if you really want to be energy independent, it's not in solar, it's not in micro hydro. Like you guys are seeing, if you were running micro hydro during this, monsoon season that you have, you're going to have a lot of days where you're out of power because the water intake is a real problem. The beautiful thing is when you set up an effective biochar reactor, you have a constant source of gas. And your gas could run, you do just a little natural gas conversion on your gasoline generator. Now you have constant, fuel for your generators.
Hey Bear, I was given that gasifier book at Greater Reset last year, which I handed off to you, which is pretty cool for doing exactly this. It's a great idea for the farm situation off grid. I got to admit.
I got 2 copies of that book, and I gave one to our mechanic because he's really inclined and inventive that way. So I'm hoping that he jumps in. I keep prodding him. Did you read it yet? And I want him to build me one.
Well, DARPA has the best resource for it. DARPA, I think it's the Department of Homeland Security. That's where I'll send you guys the booklet that I got from the Department of Homeland Security. But they have a whole section of the Department of Homeland Security is about living off grid. It's really wild. And their gasifier, their model of how they do the gasification is the best that I've seen. And I've seen like 7 or 8 men on YouTube create this machine. And while you're making your biochar, you could be cooking and then also storing gas for the future. Like that's the ultimate Domesteader or homesteader thing. I mean, you're energy independent at that point. And that's really my long-term goal. Like with our farm here in the Ozarks, we have enough biomass here where I could easily do that.
That's beautiful.
Same thing where we're at. And as we were saying before the show, I'm so over solar panels and all that. It's been good to us because, we have a good system, and it gives us that measure of independence and allows us to live and farm where we do, but it just still seems so antiquated and wasteful. And then batteries and everything else.
And plus the damaging effects of the EMFs with the solar panels and all the toxicity that comes with that. It's all touted as this great green energy, and it's really not.
No, not at all.
No, I've done enough installing of EV or of PV panels. I've had to rectify thousands of batteries in my life. So I have no real confidence in battery technology. I've been seeing super capacitors for 16 years. Nobody's produced a product that really works. Lithium ion, now they say iron ion, like all these different things. None of them do what they say they're going to do for any given period of time, especially if you live in a humid environment. I mean, Costa Rica is the biggest shit test for me in most things because everybody that would get, solar there, their solar would die very quickly. And it was all because the batteries just lose the capacity to carry a charge. So that's also what pushed me towards biochar, was to have the capacity to actually run my electronics with a generator. Out of all the things that I saw, for as much crap as a good old, rank hill cycle motor, gets, they're still so reliable, and you can get them anywhere. You can get a gas generator anywhere, and for $50, you can put a little natural gas conversion on it. And if you know how to make natural gas, you're set. So to me, that's resilience.
That's pretty beautiful. Talking about domes and sort of centrifugal, I always say it wrong, energetics of the sort of, how the toroidal works in terms of the ether. I'm always curious on how in the future now we could start to capture that energy. And I don't know if that would be through structured water or whatnot, but alternative forms, because we know there is energy in the ether. Or the aether, excuse me. And by literally through geometry, that creates, a charge. So I think that's the exciting stuff that we're getting back to, that they probably had during the Tartaria days with the little egg spires or the egg shapes on top of, like you see in the classic kind of Russian cathedral structures and stuff, where they were using mercury maybe or whatnot to get that centrifugal action to store energy. Have you considered this sort of stuff? I know it's pretty out there, versus having to burn things, which is still that explosion versus, I guess I'm getting into implosion dynamics here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
which is Schauberger.
Yeah, Schauberger. Yep. So when you build a beehive dome with Super Adobe, you're essentially making a coil on top of a coil on top of a coil on top of a coil, that the radial pattern is going in towards a point. And I was on like, rung number 30 on one of the domes I was building. And between each layer, you have two lines of metal. And so I had built some earthen batteries before when I was a kid. And I was like, wait a minute. This is an above ground coil that's insulated by earth. If I was just to ground one side and then put a spire on the other side, if it's 20 feet tall, that's 2000 volts of potential. And this was like in 2008 when I had that revelation. I'm like, our buildings should be powering themselves.
Exactly.
That was like, I had that. And so when the Antiquitech stuff started to hit the scene, I'd gone to Tesla Tech, and the nerds out there were giving me a bunch of information about how these old buildings with their chimneys, the way their chimneys were, they weren't designed to actually burn wood in them. And then when you see a cross-sectional diagram of the chimney, they would have these two plates of metal that would go all the way down into where, the fireplace would be. Fireplace. And in front of the fireplace, you'd have these two nodes. One node was connected to the front panel of the metal. The other node was connected to the back panel of metal. And then they found that these were connected all the way down into a cistern that would be in the bottom of the building.
There's the water.
A lot of these cisterns were connected through open water channels. So there's your current. Because I've built cloudbusters where they're orgone accumulator where you can direct the energy. And what do? You have the back line of it within a flowing body of river. So somehow, some way, they were transducing the chi, the orgone, like all this stuff is interrelated. Whatever you're going to call it, the bioenergetics. They were transducing it, and then they put enough resistance into the system that I think they were doing resistive heating.
Yep.
It wasn't because there's so many of these antique fireplaces that have no carbon. You have this fireplace with the chimney, quote unquote chimney, and there's literally no one could ever do a chimney sweep in it, and there's no carbon. Nobody ever built and burnt. And if you're a fire guy, if you're really a fire guy, you're going to build a thermal mass heater. You're not going to build a fireplace because fireplaces are so inefficient. All your heat goes out into the environment.
Not to mention occasional chimney fires.
Exactly. Because all the creosote explodes.
Just had one of those last month. And whatever you do, you do not put water down the chimney.
No. No.
Please tell me you didn't try that. Did you crawl up on the roof with a hose?
It was not me. It was not me. We are a volunteer fire department here in Gasky. But no, you want to dampen that fire from the fire side as much as you can. That is so fascinating with the plates moving up. That makes a lot of sense. So it was conducting the heat there. And in the water, the current, I remember going to, you look at ancient structures like in Spain, going to the, what is it? It's the Moorish fortress there in, blanking out where I was, but it was just water going everywhere through this ancient structure, and they had it routing through every room in these little channels of water. And it was like, of course, the conventional wisdom saying that was just how they access water, but to me it seemed like it was like an informational current that they were using. It'll come to me in a second what this famous fortress is in Granada, Spain. And you see that through antiquity, the use of water. So we've lost a lot with what water's capacitance, right, really is. It has to do with this whole electric universe thing that's going on here in the dialectic plane that we live on.
We've used water implosion devices for our irrigation for a good number of years now, and they really, really work. You notice a tremendous increase in yield and which are growing, and even when we make nutrient teas, we do it in an implosion device. Not just a mixer, but it actually is based on the configured the way Schauberger understood. implosion.
Is that Dan
and,
Winter's device?
No.
It's
No.
not Dan's. Dan, we will have Dan on the show next month to get into all his theories
So
about
Dan has
capacitance.
one of those devices that he's created that's unique.
You know, I looked at his devices like about 15 years ago before I started making my own. I was just wondering, I'm always like, I'm a real implosion water structuring nerd. Like I've been, you know, working on my own ways of doing it by the way I understand it, and just sort of hybridizing everybody else's systems with flow forms and magnets and sometimes pressure, sometimes negative pressure, which is a fun thing to talk about, especially to somebody like you who's a body worker. But yeah, there's a lot of devices I've seen online that I haven't had direct experience with. So I always like to talk to other water nerds to see what devices they use, because all of us are finding, I just think it's like when you pray over water, you make it holy water. It's just the love of the water, just your own heart, your own structuring because of your love for the water and your appreciation for it does so much to it. And I think the device that you get, or devices, or whatever you're doing, is just an external representation of your own reverence for the holy water.
Only a Catholic priest can make holy water, please.
Are you kidding?
That is definitely a joke. The
I'm a
Alhambra was,
recovering Catholic, as is Michael. So,
by the way, speaking of Catholics, Ferdinand and Isabella took this over, but it was the Alhambra above Granada, Spain. And it was really interesting to see that, how those water channels work, because they were always vortexing and then going through channels into the next room. And of course, the Moors would always pray, you know, they're Muslims, so they would do their prayer and in these rooms with the water. So they were literally structuring it with their intention and then sending it through the whole palace in a constant flow. It was remarkable how these structures they got this stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Veda Austin's work and what she's been doing with freezing water, kind of taking the Myoto, the Japanese
Masamura Emoto's work? Yeah.
Emoto's work to the next level with by actually seeing the crystalline structure of freezing the consciousness of water. And actually Miles, my oldest son's going to be hopefully doing this experiment for the county science fair and is going to blow minds, is what she's doing with albumin egg whites and freezing them and getting feathers in the holographic image, and getting really beautiful images for the free range chickens. And in those that are caged, she's getting very harsh structures and very interesting visualizations that aren't really conducive to nature. But when she puts this is what's really trippy, is when she puts the free range eggs next to the caged eggs, over time, the caged eggs then shift when she freezes them, and they shift to the feathers in the beautiful image. So like through morphogenic resonance or something, those eggs are actually affecting the other eggs just by being next to them. And that is the structured water of the albumin. It's insane.
So that's another thing that I'm getting into now is, have you guys seen Tanya Harris's work? She's a artist / scientist that figured out how to measure the base resonant frequency of structures. She did it to, I think, 6 or 7 cathedrals in the UK. And then she applies the base resonant frequency to a cymatic frequency generator, essentially a big speaker just turned upward. And what she had found a few times was that the base resonant frequency of the cathedral matched the rose window pattern of that cathedral. And so what we're going to be doing in the future here is we're going to be taking some of these domes that I've built. We're going to find out the base resonant frequency of the structure of the dome. And then we're going to go ahead and etch that cymatic pattern into glass that will be the sun portal for the top of the dome. And so that is, we're going to make meditation spaces like that. So when a person goes in there, it's just like having the free range egg next to the caged egg, a person is going to walk into a resonant structure, and immediately the coherence within their biofield will start to increase. And the goal is to make the spaces that we live in an ordering principle, a coherence building principle, so that a person not only could be we were talking about the building electrifying itself. Well, now it's like the structure actually becomes like a real home. Like home is where the heart is. It's like these structures will give a person the coherence that's needed, the order that's needed for extra energy and healing.
On point. Just and you're not even reinventing the wheel. You're just bringing back the wisdom and knowledge that the ancients understood quite readily. That's really cool, man. I want to come out and visit your spot.
Yeah, there's nothing new under the sun. The more I think I'm inventive, the more I recognize I've just tripped over the geniuses of the past. That's it.
And there's also a lot of living elements in all of these natural materials as well that people don't consider. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of the work with people where they bring these elements that are supposedly dead for thousands of years back to life. And as far as building materials, I read this one account of people actually using these elements to grow structures. So in other words, the living structures were living,
right,
and built organically by the creatures that lay dormant in those materials.
Yeah, that's sort of my play with the coral domes. Is like I'm trying to
Right.
kind of
Exactly.
pull people's minds back to that, because we done experiments with effective microorganisms in concrete.
Mhm.
When I first
Mhm.
started building, I saw this study out of Japan where they were pouring EM into their concrete mixes, and then they would test them after 5 and 10 years, and they saw that the concrete that they put the EM in, the concrete acted like a forged medium, not a cast medium. So what that means is when you pour a cast, when you just pour something into a mold, it's not nearly as strong as if you're moving the pour in one direction, because all of the aggregate, all of the molecules turn in the direction of the flow. And all of them being coherent, that's the way a magnet works with a ferrous material. All the molecules turn in one direction, and that's what makes it magnetic, is now there's a polarization. Well, they found with geological materials, you could do that with EM. And so we did an experiment with that. We put everything in the concrete. And then when I started studying geopolymers and went to the Geopolymer Institute, that's one of the main things. That's one of the main elements of making a good geopolymer, is you add these types of elements to the mix that actually create this forge, this coherent molecular direction that really adds to the structured effect of the material.
Amazing. So with our time left, are there any topics that you'd like to get into that we haven't already? And then
You guys,
also, we need you to share all your information so people can find your work.
well, I was going to ask you, have you guys got into the whole notion of Amorica?
Explain.
Tell me.
So I'm saying it incorrectly, but I've been watching this YouTube personality for a few years. Her name's Michelle Gibson,
Oh yeah,
and she's very
Michelle.
big.
She's an Antiquity Tartaria
Yeah,
researcher.
and she's always been talking about the Moors, the Moors, the Moors. The
Mhm.
Moors built
Yep.
a lot of what we call America. I have a few friends that are from Utah that were telling me the Mormon tradition of, like, there were a few of the lost tribes that came over to this continent. And then as of late, I've been listening to a gentleman out of South Florida that runs the old World Florida And he's brought up, because I grew up in South Florida and still have family there and all that. And he was bringing up all these things, and it started connecting the dots for me because I was an avid fisherman. We would go out and GPS track places, and there would be like pyramids under the water, like all these things. But like it wasn't the time, at least in my consciousness, for that all to be uncovered. And so I love the idea, because I know how the inversion works. Like if we're told that this was the new world, we know it was actually the old world. And so there wasn't anything that was like, it wasn't like the conquistadors came over here, or, whoever you're going to say, the European influence came over here, and they came here and they were new to the area. There were aspects that were new here and there, but I'm really enjoying this deep dive into what this area used to be, because especially in the Southwest of the United States, I had like a spiritual experience the first time I went to the Grand Canyon. And I was looking at the Grand Canyon. I was 18 years old, and it was fake to me. It was so beautiful and so grandiose that my heart completely opened, and I was like, wait, the story that was being told to me about this, river slowly carving, I was like, this is utter BS. And as I got older and I started learning about plasma and dendritic waves and what those are, and the biomimicry that you see in trees with the roots and everything like that, and then getting into plasma events, I really think that this was the old world that's talked about in Greek mythology, and what the mythology around Typhon chasing the old gods to the new world was actually the North American continent. And that in the area that he came down and descended and like wiped away was the Southwest of the United States. And as he chased the gods to the east, I think that's all allegory for whatever occurred on this continent. And all these new researchers keep bringing more and more information to the light that our forefathers, especially the people that formed the US corporate governance, they were well aware of it. They hid it in their structures. They reclaimed structures, claimed it for their own. In these structures, you actually have in the dome ceilings the whole story revealed. It's not these, purely Christian stories that people try and claim. These are actually the stories of our long ago forbearance. And so I
don't think they'd lie to us about things like that.
Yeah, just like, holy water can only come from a Catholic priest, right?
The Smithsonian's totally legit, man.
Yeah, you got the wink wink nudge nudge from Spielberg from Raiders of the Lost Ark. He had that huge warehouse with all the goodies in it.
Yeah, well, there's an alternative historian, researcher, Walter Bosley, who has an interesting idea that Napoleon actually came over here and started the Smithsonian, and an interesting book about Napoleon. But there is a lot to be said about obviously all the stories of the giants, right? That and all those in the late 1800s, and also the airships. Lots and lots of documented occurrences in the late 1800s of airships, and even Tesla talking about it and UFO stuff. And like it's funny, like America here and America, I want to look into that more. There was an orgy of evidence showing that there was a fundamentally much larger civilization here, not just the Native Americans. Native Americans came and sort of, who knows? There's a lot of questions too about Native American culture and how advanced they actually were. So much that we don't know, which is really exciting about all this new research.
I have this new
tradition.
I have this new
axiom. I was just going to say with it. Go ahead.
I go by this one axiom now. If Hollywood has put a ton of money into telling me a story, pushing me in one direction, I go the exact 180 degrees the opposite way. So the whole cowboys and Indian things, how many movies have been made about cowboys and Indians? Like,
I just watched John Ford's The Searchers with my kids a couple of nights ago, and that sets like, I mean, Ford, he was put in really to set a lot of the motifs and themes. Crow 777 did a great show on this back in the day. That really is what most people think of the West, right? Is this cowboy motifs and stuff that Hollywood literally was, set. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you. There.
No, I was just going to say that, if you get into the original Ascended Master teachings, which are, a continuation of the anthroposophical and theosophical teachings that emanate from the Rosicrucians all the way back, every single source says the same exact thing, which is America was the advent of humanity upon this planet approximately 4 million years ago. And, in the first appearance of mankind on this plane, we're in a very elevated state of consciousness and, had a little bit of a downfall there. But what we're embarking on now in the last and final golden age is a return full circle to where it all began in the first place. And that's why America is so important. And of course, America, because of its history, carries a very, very powerful and special resonance, which is also why the creature class is bent on destroying it.
Yeah, and that's very evident living abroad. I lived in India, and I've lived in Costa Rica, and I've lived in Central Europe. And I have to say, the spirit that is here in the United States, even in everybody's lower capacitance, as of, the last God knows how many years, there's still this energetic independence that is in North America that is nowhere else that I've experienced.
Yep, agreed.
And all the BS I believed when I was a young man about this place being the dregs and the United States being the great Satan and all the rest of it, all the propaganda that I believed, it took me living abroad to be like, couldn't be further from the truth. Like, this place is the promised land. It is. I really feel this was the old world. And it's just like anything in consciousness, we have to claim it. You have to claim it and live it and not be in the victim attitude. And if there's any place where you can be independent and you can be resilient, it is this land.
Yeah, and there's a crystalline structure underneath the continent that energetically it has a certain vibration. There's, of course, the Great Lakes, the Grand Canyon, Mount Shasta, the Tetons. There's a lot of the overall geographical sort of makeup of America is conducive to success. It's I couldn't agree more. There's a spirit that's most in line with natural law here. Right. And a lot of times the individual is, this idea of individuation here, what makes America so great. The individual is, especially with the commune takeover of the world, is like bashed. But I also would say, in terms of like America being like the military force and causing all this harm, that's because of that individuation here is we've been attacked. And I would say, especially since World War II, those that have taken over the military industrial complex and are obviously our entire political structure, that's because they're trying to attack that spirit. So it is incumbent upon each and individual American here to do what you say, and is to live your logos and to go out and use this freedom to create beauty and to be an entrepreneur. Ideally, that's what Bear and I really dig into, and to take charge of your life, and it'll switch around like that. Really will.
And be sure to go out and vote so your favorite politician can fix everything for us.
That's 3 times now, man. You're shocking me over here.
Yeah. So
I'm total normie. Mike will tell you that.
Yeah, like we were saying in the beginning, I don't know if I hit the recording. That's a green screen behind Bear. He's actually in the heart of Manhattan. He works on Wall Street on his off days. Hey, this has been such a great chat, Topher. I knew we would have a lot to really synchronistically talk about, and I could see you being a repeat guest for sure. Definitely want to come out and visit you one of these days. I've always wanted to go to the Ozarks, man. I've always been drawn to it. I want to go fish and explore the nature there. Maybe even, I don't know, go see, my friend Chance who lives out there. Would love to visit him. And I know on Owen's side of things, I think they even do a festival out there. I know they did one last year. Did you go to the Bear Taria Festival?
Yeah, I gave a speech on the power of the hands of five.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I live about half an hour away from those campgrounds.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And our friend Matt Presti lives out in the hills in Missouri somewhere too. So there's a lot of good people there.
I would love a contact with Matt Presti. I've been a huge fan of his.
We've had a good association for a long time. I've been in the Walter Russell stuff for a long time. So Matt's good people doing very special things. So we'll definitely connect you. And of course, they're behind the scenes doing some work with old Walter Russell generators and things too that you'd probably be very interested in.
I so need to go see that, man. Because back in the day, like when podcasting first started, I listened to him with on audio and really low quality stuff, and I got the one, Walter Russell's book, and it was just like it's still the only book I just have just by my bedstand. I just like looking at the different octaves of the elements, and I'm a huge fan of Walter and Lyle Russell, and he was a big part of that.
That's
Paradise Radio.
I have his chart on my wall right here.
That's awesome.
Derek Collum, he's working on trying to, as Bear said, bring back some of Walter's 0-point energy type of devices. And it's exciting to see all of this unfolding as we all connect and kind of start connecting all the dots here. I feel like we're very close to having massive breakthroughs as these micro communities unfold that are going away from normie culture, and we're going to create our own renaissance, and the normie world will go that way, and through our little communities we'll just continue to prosper. It's exciting times.
It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, it's been awesome to be able to hang with you. I've really enjoyed your show for about a year and a half now when I first got turned on to you. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you. And Topher, if you don't mind, I might get a hold of you and pick your brain about a couple things, if that's okay.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
Awesome.
I have so much to talk to you about. Also, like this, we just touched the surface of things.
Well, I have, people like you that are in, in building in ways that go, over my pay grade, and electrical engineers like, I have Dan Winter, and, they're, like a whole different specialty. My specialty is in chemistry. And when you get in the chemistry lab, all these things we're doing, you can mimic those same things to create out of thin air in a chemistry lab. If you understand old alchemical principles, you can take rainwater, for instance, and make 12 different factions out of it. Each one will do different things, test different ways, and have different uses. So there's so much that's all coming together right now. It's really, really an exciting time. And the reason why I kind of stick in and do this stuff, I'd be, just kind of out in the sticks on my own and be just fine. But I really like what Michael and I are doing. And I credit Michael for dragging me out of the woods and getting me into this stuff. But, we get to meet very special people like yourself. And I think it really is a time for all of us to have a meeting of the minds and not just, disappear and try to hide out and create your own cocoon. It's, now's the time where we need to circle the wagons and change this thing. And people like you are on the front lines. So thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I've ever since I found the capacity to communicate with people on the internet, it expanded my like family, so to speak. Because, I think all of us kind of I'm not going to speak for you guys, but especially when I was in Costa Rica, I didn't have that many people around me that I could like fully, dive deep in the weeds with about all of this stuff that I was into. And people just kind of went along with it just because, I was just doing it. But now to be able to actually communicate and meet with people on the level of mind and heart is just like, for me, it's so rewarding. So I thank you both so much for allowing me to come on.
Beautiful. And please guys, go follow Topher on, are you on Instagram much anymore? What's like the best place if someone really wants to connect with you? You got Topher HQ, right?
We just launched Topher HQ. That's topherhq.com. That just stands for Topher's headquarters.com. And then I'm on Instagram as Biocharisma, which is Biochar Isma. And then I have the Biocharisma podcast, which is on all the podcast players now. And I'll start a live stream pretty soon here whenever I get an extra moment to do it. But at the moment, I'm just podcasting. So there's a Telegram. We have a Biocharisma podcast Telegram channel that people could connect on. And that's pretty much it.
Beautiful. I'll make sure all those links are in the show notes below. Thanks, guys, for joining us today. Thanks, Topher, again. This has been a phenomenal chat, as we knew it would be. You guys can access this on odysseyunite.live. It's on LooshTube still, but also will be on our website, alfavedic.com. If you're new to us, go check that out, alfavedic.com to support us. Go buy our products. We make amazing teas and health products out of the mind of Bear Lando and from our farm to your family's front door. So thanks so much, guys.
And very soon we'll have edible biochar in our lineup.
Woohoo!
Nice. Bear's about to go live in 35 minutes on the Greater Reset. So go check him out there. Go show him some love. And we love you guys and have a beautiful day. Don't forget to smash the thumbs up. Give us a like. That helps us out. Remember to get outside, get your feet dirty, go in the dirt, go plant something, go for a hike, show Mother Nature some love. She'll show it right back to you. Love you guys. See you next week. Cheers.